Okay.
Welcome to It's Not You, It's Grieve, a safe space to have candid conversations surrounding the many faces of grief. How do you handle the process while moving forward and ultimately getting back to living in the moment? Come on this journey as we navigate grief through the art of storytelling. And now for your host, Ahira Smith.
Hello, everyone. Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning, wherever you're catching this. My name is Ahira Smith, and I am the Grief Mending Coach. Welcome to Season 2 premiere of It's Not You, It's Grief, a podcast where we sit and talk about our journey regarding grief and loss and how we are moving closer to healing and get back to living in the present moment. Thank you all so much for joining me on this Sunday, January 28th, 2024. We're doing something a little different right now, so we're coming to you live. This is not pre-recorded. I know there are people who have this on, but they're also probably watching the game that's currently going on between Baltimore and Kansas City. So I'm glad you guys are still with us, even though that's happening. And, I'm very honored and blessed and fortunate to still be here with you all and to share this conversation with several people who have decided to join me tonight's platform to talk about their own grief and loss and how the lessons that they've learned from those experiences have propelled them closer to healing and getting back to moving to the present moment. And so, what I'd like to do right now is to introduce each one of my guests. And there, I'm going to have everybody kind of share their story as far as grief and loss is concerned. And we're just going to have a conversation regarding the lessons and what they foresee that will help people in their own time of need. So, the first person I'd like to introduce is Miss Rowena Arsa. Please forgive me if I mispronounce your last name. She's laughing at me, which means I still got to work on my pronunciations. But this woman right here, she happens to be a distinguished member of Sigma Gamma Rho Sorority Incorporated. She is a 20-year plus Army veteran. So for those who are military folks watching this, I would thank you for your service. And she has decided to come on this platform to share a story that's very personable, as well as all of our stories are, but this one more so from the standpoint of a mother. And I look forward to hearing Rowena talk about her experience and the lessons and what she continues to help her get closer to healing. Next on my panel here is Miss Kiera Jennings. She is a lovely member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. She has 15 plus years in the clinical healthcare field, which emphasis on patient care and healthcare management. Another great thing about Kiera is that she actually wrote a children's book. Yes, I have an author this season around now. I have a children's author here with a book called The Balloon, which is to help our little people, our children, to learn a little bit more and feel comfortable surrounding the topic of grief, loss, and death. And last but certainly not least, I have Mr. Andel Owens, who happens to be a distinguished member of Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated. He too is a veteran. So again, thank you so much for your service, sir, who works in information management for the government for the housing urban development. And so I just want to take this time to say thank you all for joining me on this platform to have a good conversation. Everybody just sit back, relax, and We're going to go ahead and get started with Miss Rowena. If you would be kind enough to unmute your mic. Miss Rowena, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, I can. Thank you so
Perfect.
much. Thank you. Thank you. So, I'm going to ask you to, if you'd be kind enough to start us off, to kind of share exactly. My first question is, please share your story and what prompted you to come and sit on this platform tonight.
Well, so hi everyone. Like you said, my name is Rowena. I'm coming to the platform with my grief story as a mom. In September of 2007, I had a child, a son, my first and only son. He was born in September of 2007. And in December of 2007, my son was found not breathing and he passed away from SIDS. Um, it's been almost 20 years since his death, but not a day goes by that I don't think about him and that I don't miss him. So I really came on the platform because I wanted to share my story and also to let, other moms, families know, because it doesn't just affect moms, it affects dads too. And they're often forgotten about when it comes to child loss. But I wanted to come here to share that, your grief process and the grieving of children is hard because it's not the order that you expect. You never expect for your children to go before you. So you're still trying to figure out and understand how to process your grief. So I wanted to just come on and just kind of let other moms and dads know that even if it's been 5 years, 6 months, 10 years, it's okay to still be grieving. Everyone grieves in different ways, and what way works for you is okay. And there's no timeline to grief. Everyone thinks that there's a certain timeline to grieve the loss of loved ones, but there's no timeline. There's no set process. So I just wanted to come on and share my story about infant and child loss and hopefully be an inspiration and hopefully others can relate and connect to those who have lost children. So that's why I'm here today.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And as you said, there's no time frame for this. So even though it's been a while, I want to offer my sincere condolences to you from one mom to another. I get it. I do. So my condolences to you and your family on the loss of your son. Next up, I have Miss Kiera Jennings. Miss Kiera Jennings, if you would be kind enough to kind of share a bit of your story, and especially the part of what prompted you to write your book called The Balloon. I know my audience would really appreciate it.
So first, good evening, and thank you for having me, Ahira. Um, my story kind of starts out similar to Rowena's in that I also lost a child. Um, 17, well, almost 18 years ago. It'll be 18 years in June. My first daughter was stillborn. And that was a very, very trying time. I recall I cried every single day for 6 weeks straight. It's just a guttural pain. When you lose a child, you lose a part of your future. It's heart wrenching, and you can't prepare for it in any way, shape, or form. But I'm grateful to God that He sustained me and He gave me the strength to continue to move on and move forward and press my way. I went on to have three more children. Um, but it's important that people recognize that their births and their presence don't replace the loss of my first daughter. She's still in my heart. She's still my first child. Um, but after I lost my daughter and, my children were born and I went on, in 2018, I lost my father. And losing a parent is devastating. I was and am a daddy's girl, so it crushed me. Um, but I had to put one foot in front of the other to help support my mother and my younger brother and to just kind of be the rock. I am, I guess, seen as like the gatekeeper in my family. So I felt a sense of responsibility to kind of keep things going because I know that's what my dad would want. But in losing my father, from the time we lost my dad and then 3.5 years following that, we had 6 additional losses in the family right after one another. And that was devastating to me. I lost both of my grandparents, 2 of my aunts, a cousin, and my husband's grandmother, all back to back to back. So there was no time to grieve for one before the other one passed away. And when my grandparents passed away, my grandfather passed 18 months after my dad. And this is my mother's father. And a month and a half after he passed, my grandmother passed. That's my mother's mother. And I know she passed away from a broken heart. Um, I think dealing with so many losses back to back just made me cling to life that much more. Life is so precious, it should not be taken for granted. But the impetus for the book, The Balloon, was because, yes, I was a grieving daughter, but I was also a mother at that same time. So while I'm grieving for the loss of my father and just not knowing what to do, I'm still having to mother and nurture my parents. I mean, my children were grieving for the loss of their grandfather, and they were very close to my dad. And then seeing how it changed my mother. So I wrote the book, The Balloon, because the story in the book is about a child who experiences the sickness and loss of a grandfather. But the story that's in the book is actually what I told my daughter. I don't know how I came up with this story. I can only think it was the grace of God, because it was nothing that had ever crossed my mind before to explain life and death in such a way that children could understand it in an age appropriate manner, um, using a balloon. And that's what I told my daughter. And I woke up in the middle of the night, wrote it all down, and I wrote the story, and I sat on the story for about 3 years before I published it. I just published it last year. And every time I tried to go and publish it, it just didn't feel right. I didn't feel like I was connecting with the illustrators that I had reached out to. It wasn't speaking to my soul. And when I finally did, just on a whim, I ran across an illustrator. I reached out to her. We were able to connect. And I know it was divine intervention, just because of the conversations that we had. She put little Easter eggs in the book of things there's no way she could have known that were so personal to me and very specific to my father, unless the Holy Spirit gave it to her. There's no way she could have known. And I would have never come across her if it not been for divine intervention. She's all the way in England. And she did a phenomenal job on this book. And I'm just so blessed and grateful to know that it's touched so many people. I've received such positive feedback from parents who are looking for a way to explain grief and death to their children, but also telling me that it's helped them through their own grief journey. So I'm just grateful to have this opportunity to share the book, and to share this platform with you all to talk about this.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much, Kira. And again, my condolences to you on all the losses. Uh, we can definitely connect offline, because 2018 was a year of it's like a trickle down effect. So I definitely understand. And certainly not least, Mr. Andel Owens. Mr. Owens, thank you so much. Again, I appreciate you for joining us, being the gentleman holding it down here with a bunch of phenomenal ladies here on this platform on a very heavy subject. Please share with us and the audience what prompted you to come on this platform as well, and your journey.
All right. Well, first, again, thank you again for having me. Actually, having all of us to giving us an opportunity to share our experiences with you. So, and with others as well that are watching. So, I'll say that first. Um, yeah, my story is so similar to the other ladies on the panel. Mine is about loss, number one, of family members. Um, I had a sort of a situation, so like Kiara is having, like, basically like back to back to back losses. Okay, father 2019. Actually, and I was the one that found him. After he had passed away. Um, that was April. My older brother, He passed away the next month in May. Uh, Again, it's 2019. And then my mom passed away, in 2020 in February. So I think that's about three losses in about 6 months time frame. I think, if I'm not mistaken. Um, so that was a lot, as of course you can all understand, especially mom, right? That's like the ultimate loss. But yeah, but all of them, affected me in one way or another. Next, but I think the one that really brings me here today is so back in the end of 2022 is the loss of my wife, and I was married for 21 years. She's a phenomenal woman, and I definitely there's a lot of things I could share about her with you guys. That you'd be like, okay, yeah, she definitely left her mark on this world. She really did, and so again, if I can share something, that could help somebody, I'm very happy to do it. Um, and I would say, first and foremost, again, to everybody just off this top, you know, don't, no matter how you're feeling, saying, just take one day at a time, try and say take one step at a time, grieve the way you want to, because there's no book on this, no rules behind it, everybody's different. They're going to handle the grief in their own special way, a different way. Um, so again, I'll leave with that. But then, of course, as we go further into this conversation, I'll share more. But thank you.
Thank you. And again, condolences to you on your losses as well. So, with that being said, let me just go ahead and just start asking my questions, because again, I know we've all experienced different levels of grief. Some of us have lost a child, some of us lost a parent, our spouses, and it's a lot. My question, and anyone can go first. My question to you is, do you feel there was much conversation when you were growing up regarding grief and loss? Did you ever feel comfortable to express your grief outwardly as you were growing up?
I'll jump in. I'm no stranger to grief. I have a large family across many generations. So as a child, I went to a lot of funerals of a lot of people that I cared a lot about. I was blessed to know five of my great grandparents. So I watched all of them transition, many, many great aunts and uncles. And I've seen, the elders in the family cry and grieve over the loss of life. So I feel like it wasn't necessarily talked about, but it wasn't shunned either. We didn't shy away from it, and we always do keep memory alive. But I will say the topic of maybe grief counseling or seeking therapy following the loss of a life of a loved one, don't recall ever hearing that talked about. And the first time and the only time I've ever had grief counseling was when I lost my daughter.
Okay.
And I would answer that question, no. Nobody ever talked about grief. And actually, I come from a big family as well, especially on my mom's side. My grandparents had 21 kids. They all had kids. So I had a lot of cousins, uncles and aunts. So yeah, some of them had passed, as the years went by. But yeah, but nobody ever talked about it. How do you handle it? We just, the person passed away. Okay, we depending on how you felt some type of way about it. Of course, the funeral. Of course, the funeral was what it was as well. Okay, get to the cemetery, get to the repast, and then the next day. I'm not saying people wasn't grieving, but then life went on. But again, it was never talked about. What do you do? How do you grieve? Saying how does this affect you? Now that was just my experience growing up. Never, it wasn't talked about.
So my experience is a little bit of the opposite. I grew up in a very small family. It was just me, my mom, my brother, and my dad. So we never really talked about grief at all. And to Kara's point too, we never really talked about a process after grief. Like you're forced to deal with the death, you're forced to deal with the loss, but you don't know how to process your feelings afterwards. And growing up in a Black family, I'm often taught that it's really not okay to show certain emotions and so certain feelings. So those feelings were always suppressed. But my first time ever experiencing a funeral, to be quite honest, was my son's own funeral. I've never been to a death. I've never been to a funeral. Um, I've never had to bury someone that was really close to me. And ironic enough, the one that I had to bury was my own child, with the funeral and burial costs and cemetery and picking out a casket. But for me, no, growing up, definitely we didn't really talk about grief. We didn't talk about how to handle loss. We didn't talk about any kind of feelings like that, because at the time, growing up with feelings, especially at being young in a African American family, it was not shunned upon, but it was often told to me that, well, you're not supposed to have feelings at your age. You're not supposed to have these kind of feelings and these kind of thoughts. So we were often told, well, go wash a few dishes, go do these things, shake those feelings off, and you'll be fine the next day. So it was, our feelings and emotions weren't often shared. And that really goes past grief too. But that's kind of my experience, is that we never really talked about grief, and we never really talked about the emotions that came after grief.
Yes, that's the consensus that I've been getting with a lot of people who I've spoken to over this past year regarding grief and loss. That it's just one of those things where it may be talked about, but it's not shared. You talk about it at that moment, and then afterwards, you get back into your life, whether that's going back to work or watching the kids, you just go back into your routine. However, I believe when the pandemic hit, what was done prior to March 2020 is no longer suitable. It's we can no longer go back into that frame of mind, because a lot of us had experienced so much during that time frame of 2018, 2019, 2020, all the way to 2023. And so now people are like, I can no longer go back into my old way of thinking, because you've changed. You're not the same person as you were when your person was still with you. So one of the questions that have definitely been asked that I've asked of myself regarding grief and loss was, how has this changed me spiritually? How has my relationship with my father and my mother and my daughter, I was one way, but when they made the transition, and I grew up in a um, very faith-based home life, my relationship with myself and that of my beliefs shifted. Did that happen for each of you?
For me, it did, wholeheartedly. I know for me, I have my everything comes from God. Like everything I have, everything that happens, like comes from God. I know that He is at the top. I know that everything that happens in my life is because of Him. So my faith in God is really strong. But when I lost my son, um, and I've also lost my father too, but that's a different kind of grief. When I lost my son, I questioned God a lot. I questioned, why would God bless me with a child? Why would God give me the gift of carrying him for 9 months? Why would God have me be in labor, give me the child, and then just to have him be back with him again in the end? So for a long time, I questioned God. I wondered why that happened. And a lot of people tried to console me. I got to a point where I got tired of hearing in the beginning, oh, well, it's God's will, or God did this for a reason, or this is why this happened because God knew best. At the time, I didn't think that because God, yes, I know knows best, but that's not really something when you're going through grief, especially with child loss, any kind of loss, that you really want to hear at that time, because you're missing that person so much, and that person has so much of an impact of you. And regardless of your faith, I'm super spiritual, super believer in God. It's just something that's hard to hear at that time. And you know that people mean best. Sometimes they want to say the right things, but they just don't know how to say it. But for me, my spirituality was tested for the first 2 years after the loss of my son. Of course, gradually, um, I found a place where I was able to get back to having my faith in God. But I just think for me, my spirituality just in the first 2 years shifted, and it went to from not believing in God to focusing on Him again and realizing that, yes, it did happen for a reason. And yes, I was able to be a vessel for that. But in the first 2 years, it was rough, and my faith was definitely tested. And hearing the words from people say that God knows best was not helping me in the beginning stages of my grief. So.
So I would say mine was, I guess, interesting because well, to my wife's her faith, right, was so strong, right. She's laying in a hospital bed, tubes and this and that and this all over the place. I mean, it was just crazy scene. But even prior to that happening, again, her faith was so strong that the guy was going to deliver her. So seeing how strong she was, I mean, at least outwardly telling me that, So in them days when I felt like, being mad at God about what was happening to her, or about to lose my faith, maybe, I always, I sort of just, I didn't allow it, even though I felt it coming, but I sort of was able to push it back because, again, I see my wife, and again, everything that she was going through, and again, it was a lot. It was a lot I had to see, and um, it felt like, she was a strong, her faith was strong. She believed in God. She's a soldier for God. She loved him, all of that. And to see that what she was going through, just didn't make sense to me. Right. So I could easily say it, got mad at God and this and that, but again, but even like I said, even when she was in the hospital, again, talking about she's going to be healed and delivered from what she was going through, because her faith is so strong, that sort of at least allowed me to, again, not allow that madness and that anger to sort of set in. Like, so even though sometimes it might start, but I was able to push it back and just say, it was God's will. I clung and held on to, um, you know, God's will, His, not our will, His will be done, basically. And then yeah, sometimes when people like Rowena was saying, when they came with the I won't call them cliche things, but because I get what they were trying to say. They were being helpful, trying to say it's trying to help me, right. It was like, I don't want to hear that right now, trying, because right now my loved one, is going through this. And again, the sight, right? The sight and knowing what she was going through, it was so hard and tough, I'm trying to say. So, but at the end of the day, yeah, yes, I sort of kept the faith, and that no matter whatever was happening, she was gonna be good, and not allow my faith to not I didn't allow myself to lose it, even though sometimes it seemed like it was starting to. But again, because of the example she was setting for me, that she held on to her faith for me to the very end. That even though it didn't happen, but that she was going to be healed, right? And the guy it was going to be a miracle to happen.
So I feel like I'm a mix between Rowena and Dale. When I lost my daughter, same thing. People come in saying the cliche things, and I'm gonna just be honest. I don't want to hear it. I was like, get away from me. I don't want to hear that. What I want to hear is my baby crying in my arms. I don't want to hear no scripture. I don't want to hear your prayers. Don't come and talk to me about God. I don't want to hear any of it. I eventually got over it and found my faith again. And I felt like my faith was super, super strong. And then when my dad got sick, it kind of rocked me a little bit. And I was like, okay, it's time for me to put on the whole armor again. I need to shore up because I got to fight for my daddy. He always fought for me. I got to fight for him. And this is the only way I know how to fight for him. And it's through my faith, and it's through prayer. And so that's what I did. I know the people in the hospital thought I was crazy because I had scripture plastered all over his hospital room, all over his bed. I had a sign on the hospital door. Like I think it said something like, if you don't believe, don't come in, something like that. Like I didn't want non-believers coming in the room stirring up doubt for what I knew God told me he was going to do, which was he was going to heal my dad. I knew that I knew that I knew my father was going to be healed. And then when he wasn't, I said, well, wait a minute. That's not what you told me. That's not what you said. And it wasn't so much that I was angry, but I was confused. And I was like, but why would you tell me something? And I know that was you that told me because I know the sound of your voice. But you did the complete opposite of what you said you were going to do. So I pulled back um, because I'm like, I couldn't understand why you would do one thing and say another. The words and the actions were not aligning. So to me, I was like, I can't deal with this right now. And my mother's faith is always strong, has always been strong. I admire that so much about her. And we got to continue to pray, continue to thank God. And I was like, yeah, I don't want to hear that. I didn't want to hear that. But at the same time, knowing I love God, like I love God. But I didn't want to hear that mess. I didn't want to hear no prayers, no scripture. I didn't even want to hear the word God. That's how upset and frustrated I felt. But what I realized was he did heal my dad. He healed him on the other side of heaven. And that might have been his prayer while I was praying for him to be healed on this side of heaven. So I had to reconcile that with myself, that we might have been praying for two different things. And like Andel said, seeing him with the tubes and the sounds and just all of that, I think I still have a little PTSD from that. It's very hard for me now to go into a hospital because of all of that. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I know that God is faithful and he's always going to do what he said he's going to do. But it's not according to my will, it's according to his will. And once I started to kind of hold on to that firmly, I was able to kind of let go of some of that animosity and that resentment that I was building up towards him.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's definitely there is, faith is all in this conversation right now because each and every one of us has had our own tug of war, if you will, regarding faith. And I think sometimes depending on the generation that came before us, as you said before, Rowena, you don't question it. It's just is. However, me being that of a Gen Xer, I'm going to ask questions. Well, why? Why? And I think because it's not to be indefiant, but because I just really truly want to be not only understand what's going on, but to be comfortable in it. Because what I've learned through my own experiences is that there's no getting around it. We can't get over it. You can't get underneath it. You can't go over it. You have to really walk through it. And on top of that, everybody's journey is different. To me, I've always associated grief or the journey of grief like a roller coaster, thinking like you got 5 of the scariest roller coasters in the world connected to each other, and you're just on this up and down, sideways. It's like all over, and you just don't know which way is up, which way is down until you're ready to just push the stop button and be like, okay, I want to get off, or I want to move. I want to move to the next part. I want to get something to eat, or I want to get up out of bed, or I want to talk to somebody. So, what are some ways that you have incorporated to help you navigate your journey? What have you done besides relying on your faith? I know somebody mentioned earlier about maybe talking to somebody, but what else has helped you navigate through those dark times, those scary times regarding your grief and loss?
Well, I know for me, one of the first things I did was, seek counseling, grief counseling. Because well, even when my parents and my brother passed, I didn't do that. Okay. But I think this time, I really had to, right? And I'll say this because, one thing I learned a few things while I did it, but one of the biggest things I learned is like the first day, and I sat down with my counselor, and and I said to him, I was like, man, I'm like crying like every day, right? And like when my mom passed, I might have been on like 1,000, but my wife passed, I'm on 20,000. Trying to say like I was just crying way more and more for my wife, even my parents and my brother, and I was like, that was like weird to me. But one thing he told me, and which made sense, he's a psychiatrist as well, but he got a lot of research. He put out, the data, and he said, well, here's a list of things that, that how we grieve, I guess, listen to what how we grieve for, when we lose somebody. And I get it, like, it was like 40 things on there, but um, mom and dad, like number like 4 and 5, I think I'm not mistaken. But the thing was, spouse was number one. Okay. And that made sense. Okay, once we talked about it, because guess what? Your husband or wife, whichever one passes, right? But that person, you're married to. Like, so I was married 21 years, so you're married for a nice amount of time. Of course, you're sharing your bodies. You're having kids. You're going through challenges. At that kitchen table, which bills we're gonna pay. All those things like that. A marriage is, the ups and downs of marriage, right? So that was one of the biggest things to come out. It made so much sense why I was crying, grieving a whole lot more on another level for my wife than I did for my mom, which I thought would be the ultimate loss. Okay, which before this actually happened. So the counseling was very helpful for me to learn some things about what was going on and why. That was one of the. It was some other things that came out of it, but that was one of the biggest things I took, and that helped me a whole lot to to put things in perspective. Because and to sort of get me back on track. And also, I spoke with I had some guys I knew who actually had similar situations. My neighbor right across the street, his wife actually died from the same thing. It was breast cancer. I can just say that, same thing. But this is back in 2015, so I can go to him. Another guy that's lost his spouse pretty much at the same time that I lost mine. So we was able to connect on that level, right? So getting their experience, how they deal with it, I wrote my little notes because anything I could get, from them to help me, I was going to try to implement if possible. Okay. I know we just talked about spirituality, and our challenges with it, but yeah, but I didn't have to go back and pray, and pray for the right things, trying, pray for, um, God to guide and direct me, right? Pray for, to help me reach my goal, which my goal was I'm setting, for my heart to be healed, trying to say to, and my, we have 2 kids as well, and I'm praying for them also, you know. Um, so how I was praying, what I was praying for, especially for myself. Never, and also I had to realize within me, I had to, at the end of the day, I had to be functional, right? Even though what was going on and how it happened, and I had 2 kids to take care of, right? I had, we had some businesses that we had, and all this other stuff that was going on. So I had to make sure that I was right, keep things in perspective, So I'll say to everybody, don't lose yourself either, right? Make sure, yes, you're going to grieve, and as I said to you ladies, I did grieve, but also just make sure at your best, keep your head straight, understand what you got to do, because at the end of the day, that sun does come up tomorrow, right? Everything that's life is going to keep moving no matter how you're feeling. Trying to say it's going to happen. Bills going to need to be paid. Trying to say stuff is not going to stop. So yes, I would say to people, just grieve. I'm not saying don't, but try to, if you can, keep that perspective about what you have to be functional still. Okay. And doing that really helped me as well. Okay. So I'll just sum it up again, the counseling, speaking to the people again, that sort of went through some situation, adjusting my prayers to ask them specifically what I wanted, to help me reach my goal of my healing. Okay. And keeping things in perspective as knowing I had to be functional, all right, to ensure that everything I need to do, paying my bills, taking care of my kids, right, taking care of me, right, was very helpful for me.
I could share. I was gonna wait for Kira, but I could share. I think for me, what I've realized over the past in just 2 years, because my son passed in 2007. I used to, number one, of course, it's always the counseling. That's always kind of been the strengths for me. But the top two things that have helped me through the grief process is number one, um, and the main one actually that was given to me by a friend and that I've taken with me is that grief in society for me associates with that you have to be sad all the time. You have to be depressed. You can't get out of bed. So grief always has kind of a negative connotation when you talk about it. But for me, over the past few years, I've learned that, hey, when you can have those depressed moods, you can have the sadness. You can go through that process and you will continue to go through that process. But grief also means to me celebrating his life that he was here for, right? So over the past 2 years, I've been able to do birthday parties for him. I've been able to do candlelight vigils for him. I've been able to remember him and not associate it with it all the time of depression and sadness and not getting out of bed, but doing things in remembrance of him and helping me to realize that grief doesn't always have to have the negative connotation with it. Grief doesn't have to mean that you're always suffering. There's going to be moments, a lot, where you're going to be suffering, and that's okay. But you can also associate grief with trying to do things to remember the loved one, trying to do things to think about the good times that you have. And for me, it's been that those remembrance ceremonies, remembering him on the day of his death, participating in walks for infant and child loss. So it's been those things that have kept me remembering him with grief, but still knowing that it's okay for me to cry one day. It's okay for me to not have a good day and remember him. So that's one way. And another way that I've actually done that's helped me a lot, I find that sharing my own story kind of helps other people realize it's not just them. And lately, I've been trying to share my story with moms, but especially with fathers too as well. I'm not a father. I've never been a father, but I think often when it comes to grief with men, and I'm not an expert because I'm not a man, but grief with men is often frowned upon. Even with my child loss, everyone was really focused on me and my loss, and the attention wasn't given to the father at all. No one really asked him how he was. No one really asked him how he was doing. So I think for me, speaking up about grief and infant and child loss for mothers and for fathers and sharing my story as much as I can has helped me a lot and has helped people connect with me and for me to connect with them in ways that I might not have been able to had I not shared my story. So I'm hoping that sharing my story actually helps others through their grief process for infant and child loss.
I definitely echo what you just said, Rowena, about speaking to people and sharing the story. It's almost therapeutic a little bit. I definitely did that with the loss of my daughter. And I've just seems like I've taken up the baton and started doing that after the loss of my father. And one of the things that I think I'm most proud of is what I have done in his honor. Like you mentioned, I had all of this grief, this negative energy, and I needed to do something with it. So I started a nonprofit organization in honor of my father called Love You More Foundation. Because I would always say, I love you, Daddy. And he would say, I love you more. And, when my dad was alive, he and my mother always gave back to children, always gave back to families. So that's what Love You More Foundation does. The organization was established to give back to children and families who are in need. And that has been such a balm to my soul because, one, it's keeping his memory alive, it's keeping his legacy alive, but I'm doing something to help somebody else. And that is just so soothing to me. It just gives me such joy. And I know that he's so proud of what I'm doing in his honor. And when I wrote the book, of course, again, that was something I did for my father. The dedication is to him. But all of the proceeds from the sale of that book go to the foundation. They're going to help somebody else. So all of this is about helping somebody else. And the ultimate goal is really for God to get the glory. It's not about me. It's about him. and it's about honoring the legacy of who my father was. And I'm just so grateful to have the wherewithal to kind of put one foot in front of the other to keep going. Yes, some days it's very, very hard and I want to give up. I don't want to do it anymore. I feel overwhelmed. I feel burdened down. It feels like a weight on my shoulders because I don't want to mess up. I don't want to disappoint my father, and I don't want to disappoint anybody who's watching me and what I'm doing in honor of my father. I want everything to be right. So that is a heavy load to carry, but we are doing amazing things with this organization. Since it's been established in 2019, we have been able to positively impact the lives of nearly 6,000 children and families in Virginia, in Africa, in Maryland. And I'm just so grateful that my grief has allowed me to find an avenue to release that energy back out into the atmosphere instead of keeping it bottled up inside of me.
I'm blown away by each and every one of you all's stories. My goodness, this is great. This is a conversation that we need to have more often. Again, I know grief is just such a heavy topic, and there's just so many facets of it. Unfortunately, everyone here, we've all experienced his losses regarding people who have passed on, but it's also to it's deeper than that because it's not just about somebody who's transitioned. It's about the relationships that we have established with these people, whether they are in our lives spiritually, or they're no longer here in terms of physically. They might have moved on into another relationship, but one of the things that I've always associated grief with is just that we grieve is because we love. And the reason why we love so hard is because of these relationships that we've had with each of these individuals that we're currently talking about. For those who are having difficulty, and I know that Rowena really touched on it a bit, as well as Andel, about about grief and men. I definitely want to encourage those men who are listening, or young boys who are listening, that grief is that even though it's inevitable and it's part of our journey, that you too can ex- express it. You can share your grief. What is one thing that you could say, or what is one thing you would say to those young men, or men in general, regardless of the generation, when it comes to grief today in 2024? What is something you would like to say to kind of encourage them to no longer hold it in and suppress it, because it's not working? There have been too many stories about hearing about men who have suffered in silence, to where they've decided to take matters in their own hands, to to no longer be in pain. And I know I don't want to continue hearing those stories. So what is something you would say to encourage those men, or anyone in general who's just going through such a deep loss?
Um, I would say embrace it. Don't run away from it. Don't be shy. Don't be afraid to cry. And I would say to the men who are listening, when your brother is crying, don't be afraid to embrace him and hug him and love on him. Men need to know that it's okay to express their emotions. And I think that's a problem in society, even outside of grief. Men are afraid of losing their manhood, well, if they express their emotions. And I think that, like you said, holding everything in, that causes stress, and stress for the body isn't good, and that's going to cause you to be sick and do things that maybe you wouldn't otherwise do. And I think it's important for people to realize grief is like a pothole in the road. It's a journey, it's not a destination. It's never going to go away. You're never going to get over it. But if you think of it like that pothole in the road, it's always there. And some days you can go about life and you can walk past it and you can drive past it, recognizing that it's there, but you know how to navigate around it to get through that day. Other days you can be going about your life, and just for a split second you'll forget about it and you'll fall down into that hole of grief, and you're sad and you can't put one foot in front of the other. But that's okay because you know you can always climb back out of that hole and keep going around it on the next day or the day after that. So I would say to the men, don't be afraid to cry. Don't be afraid to ask for help. And don't be afraid to say that I loved and I lost. And grief isn't only just about loss of life. There's all types of grief that people experience. And I think people need to open up and be aware of that in order to embrace it. And also, we need to talk about the fact that within our community, there's like a taboo about counseling and therapy. Don't be afraid to reach out. If you need someone to talk to, go and talk to them. That's what they're there for. You can pray and get counseling. There's nothing wrong with doing both. Nothing wrong with that at all.
No, go ahead, Andel. I was really waiting for you because you would probably have the most greatest answer for this to maybe share because I'm coming from a woman's perspective and looking on the outside in. So I'm just proud and honored that you're sharing today. So I was going to wait for you.
Outside, yeah, I'm sorry, but please go ahead, Wayne. If you ladies first, it's all good. Yeah, if you want to share, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll be brief. I think for me, for especially with men, is ignoring the social media, and ignoring the things that are out there that say that. I think for me, every time I see things, social media, every time I see things, um, it's okay and acceptable when a woman breaks down to cry, like she's embraced. We're okay. We're supported. We're loved. We are okay with saying it's okay to get help, to get counseling. But the minute you see a man kind of share his story, start breaking down crying, that's not accepted, and that's not okay. And sometimes that man is made fun of, or that man is shunned, because he shares. So I just think for me to, number one, get rid of the stigma, that it is okay to not be okay for men. I know that's easier said than done coming from a woman's perspective. But for me, that's just the way I feel and the way I talk to men who have reached out to me with their struggles too, as well. And then number two, what I always encourage men to do, and women too, but men too as well, is um, to do check-ins with your friends, with your fraternity brothers, with your circle, because we never will know what anyone is going through on a day-to-day basis. And don't just check on them to say, hey, did you make it to the last meeting, or hey, did you pay your dues, because we're all in organizations. Hey, I need this from you. Check on them to say, hey, I know it's been a while since someone passed. I know that you might be struggling. Even if you're not struggling, I just wanted to reach out and make sure that you were good. And I just wanted to check on you. And sometimes that simple check in that's not associated with anything else after, like I get really frustrated when people will check on me and then they ask me for something after. I'm like, well, are you really checking on me because you're checking on me to make sure I'm good? Or are you checking on me because you don't want to appear like you need something from me? So just check on people on a frequent basis. It doesn't have to be every day. It can be a simple text, a quick phone call, but do a check-in just to check in. It can be a text, something brief, but that for me lets someone know and lets me know that someone's actually thinking of me outside of my sorority, outside of my friendships. Someone's actually making sure that I'm good and taking the time to make sure that I'm good. So those are the things that I have and advice that I have.
So yeah, I would say yeah. I think initially, yeah, my first thought comes to yeah, right, our society, right, we, us, uh, from boys to men, are told real, keep it all in, don't cry, don't let your emotion, so that's that whole nine, so you gotta understand that's something that's put into us from pretty much from day one. As we're little boys, we're told, we can't cry, right? We can't show our emotions, from our fathers, even our mothers, will say that to us, So that's just in us. So I think so people have to give us man grace with that, and understand why it's like that. Now, that's a general statement, but we all individuals too, So my take on that is especially like and I said earlier, right? Look at my mom's funeral, I mean, I was wailing away. I almost broke down. So I have no problem expressing my emotions, at least something like that. Other things maybe okay, but when it came to that, especially my mom didn't, as I said, even my wife, which I said, even I was crying even more for her than I did my mother when I was crying a lot for my mother. So, um, so I've been able to do that, right? Because I do understand and believe, right? It's not you definitely don't want other things again, other things, societal issues and things going on. I think we do that, that, but that happens. But when it came to this, I just felt like I couldn't just keep it in. So yeah, I would say to any man listening, right? And the talks I had with other people as well in the days after my wife's death, yeah, they saw me cry, and I'll say anybody I talk to, yes, let it out, right? Don't keep it in. Cry if you have to. We still, yeah, we got all this bravado and testosterone and all this other male stuff, what I'm saying? But at the end of the day, we still human beings, right? With emotions, with feelings, right? And so people really have to understand that, that no matter what, um, again, going back to again what I said about what was put into us as from boys on up, right? We're still human. We still got feelings and emotions, so, and I don't think, crying lessens your manhood, or if I'm saying that right, but again, it shows again that you are human, whatever, no matter what society says, and you got emotions and you put them on display sometimes, so, um, so I guess my main thing I would say, yeah, I guess to sum it up, yeah, I would definitely say to any man listening, right, just in those situations, express your feelings, right, express your thoughts, express your emotions, and if a tear has to be shed it, especially when you lose someone you love, right? Your mom, your dad, your wife, right? Hey, it is what it is, right? You know what I'm saying? And don't let what other people think or what society says, stop you from being, you know, um, showing your emotions toward that person or persons that you love the most. You know what I mean? So yeah, I'll leave it at that.
You all have shared some major gems with me and my audience tonight, and I just want to say thank you to each and every one of you for taking time out of your busy schedule to sit here and talk about something that's so personal. And it's not it's a lot, and it's so in depth, and I'm just really appreciative of the authenticity and how transparent you all are, because we're all going through this, and it doesn't matter what our affiliations are with our organizations. It doesn't matter our generation. It doesn't matter. A loss is a loss. And I think, again, because because of how we love, we grieve for those losses. So I think it's understandable where we are just trying to navigate through the journey to get closer to healing, and as we've all said, in one way or another, get back to living in the present moment. Before I let you all go, I just want to read something that was actually interesting. I had just attended a service the other day for a good friend of mine, and they, when you go into the services, they hand out these little programs and little bookmarks, and this statement or this poem here kind of, it resonated with me deeply. So I just wanted to just read this to anybody who may be experiencing a loss of a loved one who was ill for quite a while. And it says, "I'm free. Don't grieve for me, for now I'm free. I'm following the path God laid for me. I took his hand when I heard his call. I turned my back and left it all. I could not stay another day to laugh, to love, to work, to play. Task left undone must stay that way. I found that peace at the close of the day. If my parting has left a void, then fill it with remembered joy. A friendship shared, a laugh, a kiss. Ah, yes, these things I too will miss. Be not burdened with times of sorrow. I wish you the sunshine of tomorrow. My life's been full, I savored much. Good friends, good times, a loved one's touch. Perhaps my time seem all too brief. Don't lengthen it now with undue grief. Lift up your heart and share with me. God wanted me now. He set me free." So I know that we are all carrying our losses with us every day. And I know each of the relationships that we've had for those who are no longer with us has somehow given us strength to move forward. Before I'll let you go, I just want to ask you all, what has this experience taught you regarding resilience in your life today?
Okay, I'll go. Yeah, it definitely taught me some resilience. Because as I was mentioned earlier, it taught me that I had to you know not allow what happened. As I was mentioned earlier, stop me from functioning. Right. Again, day to day things that are going to continue to go on no matter what has happened in your life. Right. As I said, bills. Right. If you got children, or even if you might have been taking care of somebody else. Right. Maybe your parent. Right. All these situations at play, right? Um, so ha- having to take all that in and understand that, hey, this, no matter what you don't, no matter what you're going through, don't allow yourself to go into the grave with that person, no matter how much you love them, right? Don't allow yourself to do that. Stay on this side, right? Because this side is where you're going to be needed. Okay, you won't be able to do anything if you put yourself in that grave with that person. Stay here. So definitely allowed me, with that mindset, that allowed me to bounce back to the point where, yes, I can say now, um, I'm able to function, do the things I need to do, and most importantly, every day. Right. My main thing is, one day at a time, one step at a time. I'm pointing in the right direction. Okay, forward. Okay, and again, I don't care if I'm just taking one step. It's just a step in the right direction. I'm not going back. I already told myself this. I'm not going back to November 2022. Okay, I'm not. I'm not staying in the same place I was, that day in the months. I'm not staying in that place. Every day I'm going forward. And that's my prayer as well, that I make it, even if I take one step, right? I'm going forward. You have to tell yourself that. You have to do that, try and say. So you have to keep going with the goal of one day, those your grief, we're always gonna love that person, they're always gonna be in our hearts, but at least you're not affected the same way as you were maybe the day of their passing, and the days following. So you want to be taking the steps forward, going forward every day, and then you might reach that spot, prayerfully, right? Hopefully, where again, those days, especially like again, my wife, November, right? Thanksgiving was like the next week. Then came Christmas, trying to say, so all those days of, birthdays and, holidays, like those two I just mentioned, Mother's Day, um, don't allow them to have the same effect on you, that it had, say, that first year, because that shows you're making progress. So you just got to bounce back, tell yourself, keep things in perspective, knowing that, okay, you're going to be fine. You're going to get there. Just, again, the main thing is stay on this side. Don't go into the grave with that person. Stay on this side. If you do stay on this side, you'll be able to get, hopefully one day, who knows how long it might take, might a year, it might be 5 years, who knows, but one day, if you stay moving forward, you'll get to where you need to be. And that's all you can do.
You want to go, Kiara? You're good? Okay, good. I think for me, I think resiliency, especially from being in the military, we learn it's like a ball and you just bounce it and you're supposed to bounce right back, right? So when I think of being resilient, I used to think, hey, I need to immediately snap out of this. Or I used to feel guilty for a long time for having the grief that I was feeling, or for, it's been since 2007. Why do I still feel this way? Why do I still cry when my son passed in 2007, right? And I think for me, you don't have to be resilient. You have to know that for grief, it's going to come in stages, it's going to come in waves. Some days it's going to hit you super hard and you won't understand why it's still hitting you super hard. There's been years that I've gone by that I don't necessarily grieve, right? I don't cry. And last year was just one that hit hard. I cried for 2 days straight. And just know that grief comes in stages, grief comes in waves. You aren't always going to bounce back. You're going to have your moments where you don't want to bounce back, and that's okay too. But don't ever make yourself feel guilty or have anyone else make you feel guilty for the grief that you're experiencing during that time, because there's no timetable, there's no time period, there's no time frame, and that's okay too. And for me, I have a small circle, but my circle knows when I say, hey, I'm struggling, I'm thinking of BJ right now really hard, they know to support. They know each anniversary, they know his birthday, and they check on me, and that's good. So just make sure that you never feel guilty for not feeling resilient and not feeling yourself, because you're not going to always feel resilient and you're not always going to feel like yourself, and that's okay. And just take it in waves. Like Dale said, take it in stages, go day by day, step by step, and however you need to get through it is how you need to get through it, but it does not look the same way for everyone. So just don't worry about being resilient, because sometimes you're not going to be resilient and you're not going to be able to be resilient. Just take it how you take it and just move forward, and just take it one day at a time, 1 minute at a time, one moment at a time, and reach out to those people who have been through it as well. That's helped me a lot to stay resilient, and those are kind of my things that I've been doing to stay resilient.
Um, Kind of to echo what Rowena said, grief really does come in stages. Some days it feels like, it's a wave and it just washes over me and I feel like I'm drowning. And some days it just feels like a little light sprinkle. Like I know it's there, but I'm able to still move about. Every day is different. And I don't know when it's going to come on like that wave and I feel like I'm drowning. I can't pinpoint that, but I just know that the price of love is grief. And I know that if I didn't love and if I wasn't loved, then I wouldn't grieve as hard as I do. But going through the loss of so many people that I loved and who loved me is a reminder to me that I can do hard things. I can do hard things, because there was many a days when I didn't want to get up, I didn't want to eat, I didn't want to shower. The depression of grief is real. Um, and it doesn't matter how many times people tell you they wouldn't want you to cry for them. They're in a better place. They wouldn't want this for you. They would want you to live. That doesn't matter, because my heart is in 1,000 pieces. And I want to pick up the phone and call someone, or I want to go to sit at my grandmother's kitchen table, or, I just want a hug from my grandfather. I want to hold my baby in my arms. I can't do any of those things. So you telling me what you think I want to hear isn't helpful. And I think that's the other thing I want people to know about grief. If you don't know what to say nothing. I will appreciate the silence more than you tripping over yourself and sticking your foot in your mouth. Don't tell me what you think I want to hear. Just sit with me in silence. That is the best thing you can do. When someone loses a loved one, don't say, I'm praying for you. Let me know if you need anything. They do need something. They're not going to ask you for it, and they're not going to know what they need 9 times out of 10. Stop asking people that. You're putting the burden on the person who is hurting. Stop that. Just go, do their laundry, deliver some grocery and leave it on the porch. Pick up their kid from school, drop their kid off from school, make sure their grass is cut. Stop asking people what they need when they're hurting, because they're not going to call you and say, I need to grocery shop. I need to cook food. I don't have any clean clothes. No one's going to do that. I think that's one of the lessons that I learned early on when I lost my daughter. I don't ask people what they need when they're grieving. I just do. I just do. So I think that is a pivotal lesson for anyone to know. And for those who are grieving, just know you can do hard things. There's no timetable on it. I may not cry for a month, and then one day I'll hear something, or I'll see something, or I'll smell something. And it takes me back to that moment where I'm in shambles. But that's okay. It's okay. And I think that's the greatest advice I could give to someone is grieving is okay. And it is a journey. It's not a destination. It's never going to end. You're going to grieve until the day you take your last breath. And it's okay.
Rowena, Kiera, and Andel, thank you all so much for sharing your stories, your personal stories, the transparency of it all, the authenticity, and just the fact that we're having this conversation. I I appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you so much. And you're right, it's definitely a journey. And unfortunately, we're all going to encounter it. How we encounter it remains to be seen until we cross that bridge. But I just know that everything is for a reason. And as it, we don't want to hear it at the time, but looking back on it, you're right, Kiera. We can do hard things because each and every one of us at this table here has done one of the hardest things we've ever had to do. And we didn't sign up for it. We might have thought of it might happen, but until you actually experience it, you won't understand. And but you know what, we have support for each other. You know, you all are my family now, so just don't be surprised if you see me drop a message checking up on you all and everything, because this is what we're supposed to do. This is the village. This is what we're supposed to do, and I'm hoping more of these conversations are going to continue to be had, not only within our organizations and our families, our circle, but we just need to we need to continue these conversations about being consistent, you know. And I'm a firm believer that as long as we give ourselves permission to grieve when the moment comes about, you know, we will know that there will be times when we're able to honor that grief. Like Rowena has said, like the last 2 years, you're able to have a celebratory moment for your son. Or Kiera is able to write this book and start a nonprofit to celebrate her in honor of her father. And Dell is able to celebrate his wife's memory by having fostering relationship with other men who've gone through similar circumstances. That's all celebrating the love that we've had from those that we've lost. You know, and when we give ourselves permission to grieve and we're able to honor that grief by celebrating the relationships that we still have in our hearts, we will come to that moment when we realize that there still is greatness in grief because we're all still here. So I just want to thank you all again for sitting on this platform. I do appreciate it so much. For you all who are listening, watching, whether it's from Facebook or YouTube, thank you all so much for joining me and my guests on our season 2 premiere of It's Not You, It's Grief. I hope you all were able to get something from this conversation. By all means, if you have any comments or questions, please feel free to leave them in the little comment chat box, and we will see you next time. Peace and blessings to you all. Thank you all so much. Take care and have a beautiful night.
Thank you for listening, being intentional, and sharing this moment with us. We at It's Not You, It's Grief deeply understand the many facets of grieving, and we want to make sure we can be here for you. Again, thank you for listening, and tune in again wherever you subscribe to podcasts. We look forward to seeing you next time. Be well.